Before we continue with our Torah reading, Aaron Asher is going to enlighten us. She's going to enlighten us with a Devar Torah. She's going to do some teaching, and it's all yours.
Thank you, Rabbi Vogel. Can everyone hear me okay? Yep. So I'm having a source sheet passed out. I'm sorry for all of you up here. Apparently you won't have a source sheet, but I will do my best to read it out loud. I asked to go between the 6th and 7th Aliyah because in the full reading, we'll be going over the main chunk of passage that you'll find on the source sheet, but I'll do my best to read it out loud so that no one is lost. But before I start, I would like to skip forward a little bit and go to the beginning of Exodus, right, when we find out that there's a Pharaoh who doesn't know Joseph. And can anyone tell me when they think of that, right, the beginning of the book of Exodus, what comes to their mind? What does that society look like? What is happening?
He lied.
Huh?
He lied. He knew Joseph.
He lied. He knew Joseph. So why would he lie?
He's a pharaoh.
Because he's a Pharaoh.
He does.
So he does, okay.
Because if he doesn't acknowledge the humanity of the Jewish people, then he gets to oppress them.
Then he gets to oppress them. Okay. Anyone else from the audience want to say anything? No? Okay. So now I want to take it back to our Torah reading. And the first reading, which is Genesis 47, 11 through 26. And again, I'll do my best to read it. This is where Joseph, in, I think, a epic measure for measure, right? Just like Jacob, swindled the birthright from his brother, and the younger took before the older, and he ends up getting married. And Lavan says the same thing. We don't give the younger before the older here, right? Measure for measure. I don't think it's surprising that the brother that's sold into slavery and knows slavery all his life devises a way to save the world by enslaving the entire country of Egypt. So I'll start reading. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers, giving them holdings in the choicest part of the land of Egypt, in the region of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. Joseph sustained his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with bread down to the little ones. So the Torah is establishing that if Joseph doesn't feed his family, what will happen? They'll starve, right? That's so. The Torah is world building, and let's see how it continues to world build. Now there was no bread in all the world, for the famine was very severe. Both in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. Joseph gathered in all the money that was to be found in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan, payment for rations that were produced and procured. Joseph brought the money to Pharaoh's palace. And when the money gave out in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan, all of the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us bread, lest we die before your eyes, for the money is gone." And Joseph said, "Bring your livestock, and I will sell to you against your livestock if the money is gone." So they brought all their livestock. So the slavery comes in stages. First, people, they give all their money to get food, right? Then they sell their livestock. And then when that year ended, they came to him and said, "We cannot hide from you that with all the money and animals gone, nothing is left save ourselves and our farmland. Let us not perish before your eyes, both we and our land. Take us and our land in exchange for bread. And the seed that we may live and not die, and that the land may not become waste." So Joseph gained possession of all the farmland of Egypt for Pharaoh, all the Egyptians having sold their fields because the famine was too much for them, and the land passed over to Pharaoh. So Joseph gets all the land of Egypt and gives it to Pharaoh, but he does something additional. And Joseph removed the population town by town, from one end of Egypt's border to the other. Right, this is called population shifting. You might do this because you want different crops in different areas, or you might want to do this because you don't want any one population to become too strong. When the Assyrians came and conquered the northern tribes, right, of Israel, they did something like this. They shifted the population out, and they brought in a different population in to make sure those Israelite tribes did not try to rebel and get too strong in their own homeland. So only the land of the priests he did not take over, for the priests had an allotment for Pharaoh, and they lived off the allotment. Then Joseph said to the people, "Whereas I have this day acquired you, and for your land of Pharaoh, here is seed for you to sow the land. And when harvest comes, you shall give 1/5 to Pharaoh, and 4/5 shall be yours as seeds for fields, as food for you and in your households, and as nourishment for your children." So, did Pharaoh take anybody's property?
Well, Joseph did.
Joseph, but did he take it by force? No, people sold what they had, and they establish whatever you grow, you keep 4/5, we keep 1/5, but we own the land, we own the seed, and if we don't like that you're living there, we will move you, but 4/5 of the food stays yours. So we might call this kind of sharecropping or feudalism, right, in our modern words, but it is a form of slavery. The people don't get to say, "I don't want to move," The people don't get to say, I don't want to give you what we've grown. So it's a type of slavery. And the people are actually pretty happy about this, because what was the alternative? Starve to death, right? So, Joseph ends up becoming popular because of how he's done this. He didn't take anything by force. He had a lot of food available, and he let people sell what they wanted, when they wanted. And so all the Egyptians said, you have saved our lives. We are grateful to my Lord, and we shall be serfs to Pharaoh. Now, if you're on the end of the first big reading, I have this in bold. And Joseph made it into a law under the land of Egypt, still to this day, that a fifth should be Pharaoh's, only to the land of priests did not become Pharaoh's. So my question to you is, where do we put still to this day? Personally, I like the idea that Moses wrote the Torah, and Moses isn't writing till he's a grown-up, right? So at the very earliest, the end of Exodus, which means that at the beginning of Exodus, the Jewish people might be the only free people in the entire land of Egypt. If you're wondering, well, does the Bible really still refer to the famine keeps lasting? I'm going to skip ahead to a few chapters. This is the second reading, Genesis 50. This is after Jacob dies, and the brothers decide to get one last lie into the brothers, saying, oh, before Dad died, he said, be nice to us, forgive us, don't do anything bad to us. So his brothers went to Joseph, and they flung themselves before him and said, we are prepared to be your slaves. But Joseph said to them, have no fear. Am I a substitute for God? Besides, although you intended me harm, God intended it for good, so as to bring out the present result, the survival of many people. I think it's quite poignant that Joseph doesn't say, well, God did this so I could save you. Joseph says, he did this so I could save many people. And Joseph continues to say, and so fear not. Not only will I not harm you, I will sustain you and your dependents. So even though we're several chapters later, and presumably several years later, Jacob has died, is the famine over? No. What happens if Joseph doesn't sustain them? Like, let's say he doesn't even do anything bad to his brothers. What if he just doesn't give them food? They die. Right? So this is what I like to say. The title of my series is What the Bible is Not Confused About, where the Bible is actually self-referencing. And it's world building, and it's referencing the world that it built. It has reference that the famine still happens. It's referencing that Joseph needs to sustain his brother. And it's referencing that the law of Joseph enslaving everyone and taking the land is being self-referenced. I'm going to move on now to the beginning of Exodus. And I want to read. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, look, the Israelite people are much too numerous for us. And now, considering what we read before, everyone else in Egypt is a slave. They don't own their land. They don't own their, a portion of their food. They don't own the seed that they get to use. And they're being shifted around the country via population shifting. If you're an Israelite and you're in the choicest part of the land and you're not having to be moved, what can you do that nobody else can't? Perhaps grow numerous. I want to ask you, when we open this presentation and I said, imagine the land of Egypt, I want to ask you again, we're now at the beginning of Exodus, what does that story look like to you now, having read what we just did? With the idea that maybe we're the only free people, with the idea that maybe we're the only ones who can grow numerous. Yes? No, it's because he somehow gets to have money because he's the Lord of all the food, and he gives his people food. Everybody else doesn't get that food. So when you run out of food, you sell first your money, then your animals, then your land, and then yourselves. If Joseph is giving his family food all the way down to the little ones, they don't have to sell themselves into slavery. But when we get to the book of Exodus, I would argue that you have a Pharaoh who has inherited a land in which almost everyone is a slave, except for this one group of people. This one group of people that continues to grow numerous, this one group of people that is the only other free people. And so I think Pharaoh sees us as a legitimate threat. In a way that if we read the story differently, if we read that we're the only slaves at the beginning of Exodus, we don't feel like we are a threat to Pharaoh and he's picking on us, right? Whereas if everybody else is a slave and we're the only ones who have been sustained, we're the only ones who have our own livestock, we're the only ones who have our own money and all of that, perhaps we are a threat. And if we keep this idea that everyone is a slave and Pharaoh enslaves us, well then literally the only one's not a slave is Pharaoh and the priests. And I want to keep this idea going. I want to see if the rest of the Exodus narrative, if it reads differently if we accept the idea that everyone's a slave. Exodus 12:35 through 49. The Israelites had done Moses' bidding and borrowed from the Egyptians objects of silver and gold. Now remember, did Joseph take anybody's property by force? No, right? They would sell what they wanted, but they get to keep their own property, right? As long as they have enough food, they don't need to give away all their money or all their livestock. So Adonai had disposed the Egyptians favorably toward the people, and they let them have their request, and thus they stripped the Egyptians. Moreover, a mixed multitude went up with the Israelites, with very much livestock, both flocks and herds. And we don't get to know who they is. Is it just the Israelites? Is it the mixed multitude in the Israelites? And they baked unleavened cakes of dough they had taken out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, since they had been driven out of Egypt and could not delay, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves. The length of the time that the Israelites lived in Egypt was 430 years. Okay, but then we get a change of phrasing. At the end of 430th year to the very day, all the ranks of Adonai, I'm going to argue that that's the mixed multitude coming out with us, right? We're not just talking about the children of Israel anymore. They left the land of Egypt. That was for Adonai a night of vigil to bring them out of the land of Egypt. And that same night, Adonai is one for vigil for all the children of Israel throughout the ages. Adonai said to Moses and Aaron, "This is the law of the Passover offering. No foreigner shall eat of it, but any householder's purchased male slave may eat of it once he has been circumcised." This is we get some very interesting phrasing here. How often do we get told in another holiday that we have to make sure our slaves get to celebrate it with us? Not often, right? We don't really get that kind of... Shabbat. We'll get to Shabbat. But yes, Shabbat is one of the only times where we get told the slaves can't do it. But where do we get the law for Shabbat? On Mount Sinai.
Hasn't happened yet.
Which hasn't happened yet, but it's coming up. But who is the population that stands on Mount Sinai? It's us and the mixed multitude, who we're arguing are now all slaves, right? Everyone who's before that mountain is a slave. Seems a bit more relevant to say your slaves can't work on this day. No foreigner or hired laborer shall eat of it. So we're establishing that if you own a slave, they are not a foreigner, even if they're a foreign country, and they're not a slave. The whole community of Israel shall offer it. A male stranger who dwells with you would offer the Passover to the Lord. There shall be one law for the citizen, the stranger who dwells among you. So there's this kind of evening out of the Israelites and the mixed multitude when it comes to Passover. And, we know our God, right? How does God usually introduce yourself? I am the God of your fathers, your ancestors, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and Jacob, right? So I want to skip ahead to the giving of the 10 Commandments. How does God introduce himself? It's the last reading on your page. God spoke all these words, saying, "I am Adonai, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage." Is it you, the Israelites' house of bondage? No, it's the house of bondage. Why might it be the house of bondage? Because everybody was enslaved. So I don't think it's an accident that God introduces himself as, "I'm the one who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God." The house of slavery, I'm the one who did that. I also don't think it's accidental. For those of you who read scripture a lot, what are some of the miscellaneous laws that come after the giving of the 10 Commandments? They refer to slavery. What to do with your slaves, how to treat your slaves. Doesn't that make a lot more sense if everyone who's there at Mount Sinai was a slave?
Yeah.
So the next time we read this story, I would like for us to keep in mind that maybe we were not the only ones enslaved in this story. And maybe everything from the end of Genesis all the way to the giving of the Ten Commandments might make more sense if we hold the idea that everybody was a slave. Shabbat Shalom.